This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hi, this is Mark Snow, composer for the X-Files, and you are listening to the fabulous X-Cast.
Welcome back everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm Tony Black, your host, as ever, and in this episode we're covering the 10th episode of the second season of the X-Files, Red Museum. And I'm really chuffed to have back one of my best mates in the world, in the real world, and on the podcast world, although the podcast is the real world, I suppose. It exists in the real world. But you know what I mean, everyone. Yeah, he's back from his appearances on two of the most opposite-end episodes of Season 1, Ice and Space. It's Matt Latham. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you. I'm pretty sure that Tony's asked me back every single episode, but because of Space, I've had to take this long to recover.
Let's just say I wanted to give you space to recover, Latham. It's like, I tell you what, I am lost in my own time. I really am. My puns.
I'm just choosing to ignore it.
Probably for the best. That's what my girlfriend does every day. So yeah, last time you were on, you had those two episodes of season 1. So you were doing your first watch through of the X-Files at that point. So it's been quite a while since we recorded these. It's got to be a good 6 to 8 months. So how far have you got into the X-Files now?
I've felt like I've been quite disciplined because I don't think the X-Files is very much a binge-worthy show. I've been saving like one a week or having quite a few weeks off, and I've actually quite enjoyed not binging a show for once and just enjoying it at a very slow, leisurely pace. I am now at actually the last episode I've watched at the time of recording was Clyde Bruckman, is it?
Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. Yeah.
Repose, not Response. Yes, that was the last one I saw. And possibly the first episode that might knock Ice off my top spot. I don't know if it does. Yeah. I don't know if it does. I think Ice was really special, but definitely I'm at that point at the moment. So.
Ice is loved by most people, but Clyde Bruckman is another level of adoration from most X-Files fans.
Yeah. I think it's like the first real attempt at a pure comedy episode as well, I think. You know me personally, so, and I'm assuming that you'd say that I'd probably like a lot more of the comedy episodes that I've yet to watch. So, because I've been the temptation to just stick in Jose Chung, because I've been dying to watch that since I bought the box set, but I'm managed to hold back because I'm either going to really really like it or just like feel let down.
No, there's only two responses to Jose Chung. You either really really like it or you really really like it. That's it basically.
Yeah. But you knowing me,
I think I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if you didn't like Jose Chung. Whether or not you love it, I don't know, because as with everything with hype, it's always one of those things. I've been telling you about this for years. You might go into it and go, it was all right. I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was the bee's knees, which is fine. But I'd be surprised if you didn't like it. What did you think of Humbug? Because that's recognised as probably the first proper X-Files comedy by Darren Morgan.
Yeah, I liked Humbug. It was all right. Yeah.
Oh, that's the one I want to keep in.
Dear listeners, I've just a bit of background. I've just majorly fucked up talking about Humbug twice. First time I completely misjudged what my point was, and two, I went on a slight 2-3 minute thing about how much I like Vince Gilligan, and then Tony told me it wasn't him that wrote Humbug. So.
But yeah, you do like Humbug, yeah, and you did make a point about how you thought it was a bit more focused on Scully rather than Mulder, which I think is an interesting approach to that, really, because it's not always what people pick out of Humbug, really, but I can see what you mean, because she forms that bond with Lenny and all those, all the kind of freaks around there. So yeah, and we'll be getting into Humbug later in the season to talk about everyone, but It is a good one. But yeah, we'll keep track of your X-Files journey, because you'll be back on the show after Red Museum at some point. So yeah, by then you might have got to the next one, possibly. Watching episode 5 by then.
Yeah.
And we'll see where we are when you're on again next. But for now, let's get into the meat, pardon the pun, of the episode, and discuss.
Why did I agree to do this?
Oh, you haven't seen nothing yet. Let's get in and talk about Red Museum. So, Red Museum is the 10th episode of the second season of The X-Files, as I said before. It first aired on December the 9th, 1994, and it was written by Chris Carter, directed by Win Phelps. And it sees Mulder and Scully arrive in a small Wisconsin town after the mysterious abduction, apparently, and return of several high school students who have undergone a traumatic experience which the local sheriff believes may be demonic possession.
There's something I think you ought to see first. They call themselves the Church of the Red Museum. They're followers of a guy named Odin that moved out here from California 3 years ago and bought a ranch.
What's the significance of the name Red Museum?
Well, Odin and the rest of them are a bunch of vegetarians. They drove the ranch right into the ground, turned 500 head of beef cattle into pets. Calls it a monument to barbarism.
Probably went over big with a local rancher.
Well, you gotta admit, it takes some big ones to set down the middle of cow country and start a church like his.
So, out of 10 then, Latham, what are you going to give Red Museum?
I'm going to go for a 3 because on the basis that there is genesis of some really good ideas and much better episode concepts in this episode that are just wasted. But the ideas are there. Based on that alone with quite a few interesting ideas, I'm going to give it a 3 for ambition rather than execution.
Yeah, that's lower than I thought you'd say, to be honest. I always remember Red Museum sticking in my head. It was season 2 is always the season that resonates so strongly with me, given it was the first season I ever watched when I was a young boy. And there were elements of Red Museum that always stuck in my head, and it was one of those episodes, and I'm finding this as I go through it again, that isn't as good watching it now as I remember it being. And I think that this one, if you'd have asked me a few years ago or when I was younger, I'd have probably said this was about a 7 or an 8. Now, watching it and, taking it all in, I can't really give this above between a 5 and a 6, really, for me, because I think it's got some, like you said, it's got some really interesting things going on. It's got some great ideas. It links to the alien mythology without being too on the nose about it. It takes its time to get there as well. It does try and left foot you a little bit and everything like that. And it has got a good story in many respects. But like you said, there's just something about the execution that is off here. And it brings the whole episode down. Whether or not it's the direction, because it was directed by a guy called Win Phelps who would never directed another one, and he'd not directed one before. So it could be that. It just doesn't really have the power and the weight behind it that perhaps I think Chris Carter may have intended with this one. So it is a bit of a disappointment.
I think what doesn't help either is that they seem to kind of keep throwing stuff in, and then new elements slowly keep coming in, and by the halfway point you've still got these strange things that happen, which, okay, they do try and link them together, but the episode's trying to juggle so many different things together. It's like you're watching a 9-armed juggler trying to juggle 9 things at once. But if you can get that image in your head and not watching a 9-armed juggler, it's not going to be that interesting, is it? Because you're just so much going on that you don't know what to focus on.
I can't even imagine a 9-armed juggler. Which side would have 4 and which side would have 5? You haven't given this enough thought, Latham, have you?
Not really, no. But then again, it's an odd number of arms, and it's an odd episode. So.
Yeah, it is actually. It is an odd episode. It would have been even odder if they'd have done what they originally planned to do with it, which was it was going to be the first ever crossover episode of the show with a CBS show that was on at the same time as this, called Picket Fences, which was a drama about the residents of a town called Rome in Wisconsin, which is where this is set. Created and produced by David E. Kelly, who obviously went on to do Ally McBeal with quite some success. And Picket Fences, at the time it was relatively like a big thing. It lasted 4 seasons. It was well known. It had quite a decent cast. People like Tom Skerritt, Kathy Baker, Lauren Holly.
Yeah. Oh man, the cast. I mean, I had a quick look at the cast, and bloody hell, it's very impressive. I think Don Cheadle was in it as well.
Yeah, Don Cheadle. Yeah, Ray Walston. There's quite a lot of people from TV and movies who who crop up in this, and it was quite a well-known show at the time. But it's a bit like trying to cross the X-Files with Gilmore Girls, in that it would have been really weird to see Mulder and Scully turn up in Rome. And I mean, the thing is, I imagine when this was planned, they wouldn't have had the storyline that they eventually went with, because how can you really? Because in many respects, Red Museum is a sequel to the Erlenmeyer Flask, which is the first season finale. It takes a line that Deep Throat said in that episode, which was talking about kids being inoculated with alien DNA, and it basically spins off and tells that story in many respects, and it brings back the villain from that episode, the Crew Cut Man.
Very unsuccessfully, I might add, but we'll get into that.
Well, we will get into that, yeah. You're not the only one who thinks that. But it brings him back, and it ties in again to Purity Control, to the stuff which is, pretty huge. Purity Control, as you will discover, spoilers lay them, is central to the entire alien mythology of the show, and it comes back much later down the road. It's very, very important what this ties to in terms of the actual alien plot.
So is this actually a lot more tied into the mythology than you'd expect it to be?
It's technically yes, but it's also not in many respects. It's never really referenced again.
That's a very X-Files like non-committal answer.
Purity Control ultimately comes back in the 6th season, and it ties into other different things. And so in many respects, the very fact that these kids were being injected by alien DNA, it does link to the central point of the Syndicate and the mythology and things that you're just getting into as a viewer, really. So to be able to do that with a crossover with Picket Fences really wouldn't have happened, I don't think. Apparently, it would have been 2 shows shot with different viewpoints of presumably the same case, and one would be an X-Files episode and the other would have been an episode of Picket Fences. But CBS, which was another network, because obviously X-Files is on Fox, so they were trying to do a crossover, not with the show on Fox, which would have been a lot easier, but trying to do one with a different network. And they decided against it and went up with standalone stories in the end that weren't connected. But R.W. Goodwin, the exec producer of the X-Files, he said, I spent days on the phone with the producer of Picket Fences. We spent days organising our schedules. Then at the very last minute, of course, we found out that no one had told CBS, and they said, forget it. We're having enough trouble on Friday nights without publicising the X-Files. And he said, R.W. Goodwin went, it's too bad, because I think they did want it to happen. Part of the crossover was called Away in the Manger, and it aired the week after Red Museum. So you saw this, didn't you? Didn't you watch this in prep, Latham?
I started to. I think I only watched like the first 15-20 minutes, but I'm unfamiliar with Picket Fences, so from what I've gathered, it's some kind of weird mix of Erie, Indiana, a town called Eureka, and the X-Files, even though it predates the X-Files by about a season. It opens up with like these cows, like these weird cows, like suddenly doing something which, to be fair, it was like about 11:30 at night. I was like watching it, so I was only half paying attention. But the interesting bit is that, like, just right after the title sequence, there's this like crazy coroner character who's played by I can't remember the name, but he's basically he's in Buffy as someone who could turn into a bunch of maggots.
Great claim to fame there.
And he's coming in on about these like weird tests that these cows do, and he's like, oh, it's like they did it in Delta Glen down the road and stuff. I play hockey with the coroner there, and there's like all these experiments being done on kids and stuff, and like the FBI was involved, and it was alien DNA, and things like it goes on for a while that they constantly, usually where you get like the backstory exposition in procedural shows, like where someone's trying to catch up the viewer, they're pretty much summing up the plot of Red Museum in like these like odd few episodes and stuff. And like, yeah, the FBI was involved, and there's a plane crash, and there's at least 2 dead bodies, and a guy called Dr. Larson was killed. And
that's amazing that actually survived, and he's out there in a completely different show on a different network that was an intended crossover.
They don't name up the FBI agents, but they do mention the FBI was involved. And so I was quickly reading up on something, and there's someone online, I really wish I could name the person who wrote this article, pretty much thought it was basically David E. Kelly screaming a massive up yours to CBS for saying no. So try to get as much reference to the episode of the X-Files as possible. But I never watched the end of it because I was like, I'd work in the morning. So
you'd have seen the good stuff probably. I mean, that was probably the key things really. The mention of Dr. Larson and the plane crash and things. I mean, that is remarkable, and it's unusual as well that their planned crossover did still get some, should I say, DNA in the other show. Obviously, there was no mention of picket fences in Red Museum ultimately, so it only worked one way in this case. And to be fair, I mean, nobody knows what picket fences is now. It's not one of those things that people remember. So on IMDb, it's aggregated out at 7.9 out of 10. That's of 2,306 ratings. Reviews, which is, it's not one of the highest rated, but it's not one of the lowest rated either. And I think realistically, that's where I think I would place Red Museum. I wouldn't say it's a mid tier season 2 episode. It's definitely in the second. It's definitely in the lower half of the season if you were to rank them, and we will do that later on in the run. But yeah, it's not a terrible episode. It has got some things going for it, but it like we've said, it lacks something in the execution, I think. But we will have some interesting things to pick through here. So without further ado, let's go on and talk in more depth about Red Museum. So we begin with the teaser, which sets up a few different little things. Crucially, it establishes the fact that we've got connectives with the beef plant at the very beginning, which is where Beth Kane works. The mother of Gary Kane, who's the kid who ends up having this horrible experience happen to him in the teaser. Beth, played by a actress called Gillian Barber, who would later go on to appear with a slightly bigger... She's one of those who would crop up, one of the Vancouver regulars who would crop up in the show. I think she'd been in Ghost in the Machine, and she's in a few episodes of Season 3 and one of Season 4 as a character called Penny Northern, who's quite connected to what Scully's going through, so she's familiar.
This fact will probably have no bearing on anyone apart from me and Tony, but her place of birth is Coventry.
Coventry? Coventry?
Yep. She was born an hour down the road from us.
Blimey. Well, Coventry is a town in the Midlands of the UK, which is where Latham and I live, albeit on different ends of the Midlands. But yeah, Coventry's probably about a 20-30 minute drive from my house. That's weird.
It's the West Midlands' darker cousin. Like Birmingham tries not to be associated with it.
It's got a big IKEA. It's not all bad. But yeah, it's a teaser which establishes all of these different characters, and I think it sets up the mystery fairly well. What do you think? I mean, having Gary appear out the woods in his pants, looking quite terrified, with this horrible "he is one" etched on his back. I mean, it's, as a setup, it's quite freaky, isn't it?
I thought the framing was quite odd, actually, in terms of they had no idea how to try and re-establish that it was Gary, and then get him to turn round. So he just kind of goes, "You okay? And he just sort of like oddly turns around whilst the sheriff's still grabbing him. And there was just, I don't know, it just felt really odd and stilted in how they had to try and get him to turn around. And I don't know why it annoyed me that much, but
I know what you mean actually, and I think it kind of goes back to the direction not being particularly great here. And it is a bit, like you said, I think stilted's a good word actually, that would crop up in a few different places in this episode. It doesn't have flow sometimes, and I think you could have executed this better. Yeah, this opening.
Yeah. Although I do want to point out that I think it was Gary's nickname for his younger brother is Buckcrum. Hey, Buckcrum, which I think is amazing. Yeah, he calls him Buckcrum, and I'm like. I've got my notes as what kind of insult is that, but then I'm looking back, I think, no, that's amazing. I want to call someone Buckcrum randomly. Hey, Buckcrum.
Yeah, if I get off topic or something like that, or I say something terrible in this episode, just call me Buckcrum and it'll snap me back into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the safe word?
It's the safe.
Is that the podcast safe word?
It's the podcast safe word. Yeah.
You're off topic, Tony. Buckcrum.
But yeah, it is a weird opening, and it's a good opening in the sense that you don't quite know what's happened because he gets a call, definitely. He gets a call, he disappears, he's gone for hours. Yeah, and you don't really know what's happened. Has he been abducted by aliens? Has he been abused? There's lots of different ideas. So it's good in that sense, in that it doesn't tip its hand too early, and I think that is one of the strengths of this episode altogether. It doesn't try and tip its hand immediately, really. So it is good in that sense. But yeah, we're out of the teaser, and we've got the standard Mulder briefing scene in the office with Scully, and this is where we discover this hasn't just happened to Gary; it's happened to several other kids, and the whole idea of possession is floated. And this happens a few times in the show, doesn't it? Really, where you get Mulder coming on something interested because of something that isn't at all the paranormality. But in this case, he thinks it's possession. And more interestingly enough, the sheriff thinks it's possession. Now, this is a new one to me, because it's not usual that the small-town cop that they have to work with, in this case, Sheriff Mazurowski, is the one floating a paranormal reason for things. Now, ultimately, he's not like some sort of paranormal obsessive. He's doing it because he wants to finger the Red Museum for everything. But it's interesting how normally when they go to these small towns, the cops are either antagonistic, not interested, or they are, a bit useless. It's unusual that it's someone coming to Mulder and saying, yeah, someone's been possessed by a demon. That struck out for me. But yeah, as I say, it is ultimately because Mazurowski's going after the Church of the Red Museum, who are a very strange cult in the middle of this Wisconsin town, aren't they? It's where they meet Richard Odin, who played by Mark Rolston, who would reappear later on in the show in season 7. They speak to him afterwards, but they first meet him in the very strange cult, room. It's in a converted barn on a farm, and they're basically having a meeting where all the Church of the Red Museum, they've got obviously their red turbans on. There's a hint of Buddhism to them, but they're more New Age kind of hippies spliced with Buddhists. And, when we first meet them, they're played slightly sinister. They're very weird in the sense that, obviously, Mazurowski talks about them being vegetarians quite disparagingly, and he doesn't. He thinks that they're creepy and cultish, and they've got ulterior motives, and obviously he thinks they've done this to Gary at this point. But they're very weird because they're preaching this New Age kind of thing, but Odin is typing onto a computer while somebody else recites what he's saying. A, why doesn't he just say it himself? What's that about? And B, why have they got this real strange mix of like a conference centre in a barn?
Yeah,
with sort of almost like a sort of New Age Buddhist church. It's a really interesting design choice for them.
But I mean, like, is it a projector? Is it a screen? It's a very generic word processor as well. It's the kind of stuff you only get in like TV programs where it's just blue and he's typing. For some reason, he's managing to touch type immaculately with his eyes closed.
Yeah, that wouldn't even happen now, let alone in 1994. No way. Not even with the keyboards we have now.
Yeah, not even hackers from the 80s.
No,
who could like Milo from 24. Someone could, or Chloe could do something like that, but
no chance. It's weird. It is weird.
I think it's weird for weird sake. I mean.
No, it is. It doesn't, because obviously the Red Museum ultimately are a really big red herring. Possibly why they're called Red Museum, because in the end they don't really have anything to do with any of the bad stuff going on at all. They are just a massive red herring. So you might go into this episode thinking that this is a case of some weird creepy cult who are using spirits to possess people, because they talk about the walk-ins. That's the thing that Mulder picks up from this, the idea of walk-ins, which are these spirits who possess people who are ready to go and move on. And interestingly enough, spoilers again. You're going to be spoiled a bit here.
This is. I'm pretty sure Walken's involved with Samantha, isn't it? Is that
yeah.
what I'm going to say?
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I think that's roughly. I know roughly a bits of that. Just don't worry about spoiling me.
Okay. All right. Good. Because
I've listened to this podcast. I think I've been spoiled.
Well, yeah, you know enough now. There's two things about this scene. The first one is the walk-ins, which is. I don't know if I'd have to watch Closure again and Simon Zeet, but I don't know if it's exactly the same concept as the one that Chris Carter uses like 5 seasons beyond. But it is ultimately the same name of what ultimately is supposed to happen to Samantha. So it's interesting that in this, it's put out there. It's nothing else is done with it. They're not walk-ins at all. There's no spiritual element to this ultimately. But it's something that Carter, I suspect, had an idea to do, and he put it out here. It wasn't really used, and he thought, I'll keep that in my back pocket because I like that. And then when they got to the point where they were thinking about, because there's a lot of controversy about Samantha and what happened to Samantha and how they resolved that storyline. I like it personally, but a lot of people don't. And the reason that they chose to do it when they did is because they thought the show was going to end at the end of the 7th season. So they wanted to try and wrap up Mulder's emotional arc, basically. So obviously Carter kept that in his back pocket and used it again. But it's interesting. I completely had no idea that was mentioned in this episode till I watched it again. That's number one. Secondly, it's when the Red Museum talk about the Age of Aquarius and the new age, the dawn of the new age, what they're typing out on the computer. Now, spoilers again, but they say it's 18 Earth years until the beginning of the New Kingdom. That's how they phrase it. And the Age of Aquarius is, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's an astrological term that denotes either the current or forthcoming astrological age. It depends on how you calculate it, really, but it's effectively, basically, the span of civilization, in a way, counted for astrologically. And 18 years forward from 1994 is 2012, which in X-Files lore and mythology was supposed to be when the alien colonization of the Earth was going to happen. Now, given there's alien DNA in this episode, it's very interesting that is put out there, and this is when the Red Museum believed that the Age of Aquarius is going to end and a new kingdom is going to begin. Now, it's not directly tied into the mythology, but in a way, it's sort of another suggestion that Chris Carter has this idea of 2012 spinning around in his head. And it's just interesting as someone who, like me, and for other fans who followed this, to see where some of the germs of the ideas of the mythology or what happened to certain major characters are formed, because this feels like an episode where he had these ideas and he used them a little bit, but then he kind of thought, ooh, this is all really good stuff I can do more with later, and he did. And you'll see that later on as you get further into it. As a fairly new viewer, you'll see where these things crop up again. But yeah, you've got them still pushing this idea of the spirit, because when they go and speak to Gary then, he's talking about how a spirit entered him. So we're still being led down the garden path towards the possession idea. And he's talking about like an animal spirit and things like that.
So he was possessed by an animal spirit, wasn't he? He doesn't say what animal that is, he? Or...
No, I don't think he does. But it's interesting when you then see when the girl is kidnapped later on. I think her name's Katie. When she's kidnapped later on, and the same thing happens to her, she has this really quite terrifying sequence where she's being attacked by a crow after the tree turns into a crow and then attacks her and goes, wah, 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 wah. That's not a crow, but it's something. So it could be that whatever happened to him in those woods, he saw something similar, because she sees bugs crawling over her as well, doesn't she? So the drugs that are being pumped into them obviously have some hallucinogenic side effects, because he would have seen something, going by that logic, wouldn't he? He would have seen some animal go into him, which is exactly what she saw when it was attacking her. So I think when he talks about a spirit, I think he thinks that's what happened, but in many respects, it was a hallucinogenic side effect. That's how I read that.
No, actually, I completely agree. I mean, I never actually gave it much thought until you just started mentioning it, but because they say that when it's revealed that it's that like genetically alien growth hormone that we're giving the cows, that it does provide hallucinogenic effects. So I'm wondering whether, if not seeing animals, I wonder if he had the sensation of flying or moving with like movements that beyond the human capability. So again, I've never taken LSD, so I don't know.
Same, me neither.
I think I'm not more inclined to agree that it's less possession or a more out-of-body experience. I wonder whether that happens with hallucinogenic, I don't know, drugs or something. But no, I'm just wondering. Yeah, I've never actually given that much thought until now. So.
No, and yeah, it's when you look at it and you can try and put these connectives together. It's not necessarily explicit in the script, but then you're putting these connectives together. Yeah, it is kind of a thing, really. That's the thing. There's lots of different things in this episode. Like we said at the beginning, you've got this element of possible sort of spirit element, or what appears to be a spirit element, or what they imagine to be a spirit element. You've got the whole idea of this weird cult preaching sort of a new age, and ultimately the Red Museum, when they're later on, because there's this undercurrent as well in this episode, which is really interesting, about how the community has changed. When they go and see that old man, and he takes them to the farm and he tells them about the bovine growth hormone stuff, he talks about how the community's changed, possibly as a knock-on effect from this, the tainted beef, which ultimately we find out is the case. But there's this suggestion that the community's changed and they've become more violent and, nasty. He talks about how there's been like 7 rapes by high school boys. So there's this real undercurrent in this episode of like a dark underbelly to this community. And when you've got, the Red Museum there, you have that scene, don't you, where the sheriff's son is picking on the Red Museum boy and calling him a diaper head and stuff like that. And it's that whole element of not quite racism, because they're not foreign people, but it's almost like prejudice against what they believe. But ultimately, they're practicing peaceful methods, aren't they? When they go and do a peaceful protest and they get blood thrown over them, all they're practicing really is don't slaughter animals.
Yeah, I think it's just the presentation of their introduction. And I think, I guess it's the X-Files kind of playing up what you expect it to be about. So I'm guessing, on the one hand, I can kind of commend the episode for doing that, to perhaps lull the audience into a full sense of what's going on in terms of the Red Museum, which I think is perhaps one of the few things I quite liked about it was how they handled the Red Museum as a red herring, in terms of, particularly at this point of the episode where they're like deliberately, I think, playing on the audience's expectation of what the X-Files is about, in that the audience will probably automatically expect that, it's this cult are doing stuff to meat eaters, when in fact it's not. Whether the episode fully embraces that, I don't think they do. I think Chris Carter perhaps had that idea, but he was never fully sure of how to
execute it. Yeah. No, I agree, and it gets to a certain point. The whole episode gets to a certain point, and it sort of stops in a way. It's like you've got all this setup of, this community that's a bit fractured and is a bit, got this dark underbelly of either rapists or, bullies, or even, obviously, when we ultimately find out who Gerd Thomas is, who's the guy who's peepholing on them, ultimately a potential paedophile. There's this real underbelly of people in this community who have turned, quite sinister and dark. But the Red Museum, while they might appear to be creepy, weird, up to no good, doing horrible things to these kids, are actually the only true sort of peaceful people in this community. And what's lovely at the end, a lovely little touch, which I really liked, was how in the end Mulder takes the kids to the Red Museum to safeguard them, and he goes to Odin and says, "I need your help," in the end. And I think that's a lovely little turnaround by the time we get to the end, because it's proof that the Red Museum ultimately are not bad people, really.
No, I agree, actually, yeah.
It is one of the nice little touches that they managed to get the plot around there, but it kind of gets to a point after you've had the 2 kids abducted. You've had some decently executed scenes. Like I said, I think that scene with the crow is quite scary. That scared the shit out of me as a kid. It really, really did. It's quite unnerving and creepy. Scully's found out that there's scopolamine in the girl's system, which is, to do with subduing them and things like that. Mulder's found out that Odin used to be an MD and got, left over a questionable ethics. It's all pointing towards an area. But then, once they get the information about the livestock, it kind of just stops. And that's where you get the air crash. And one thing that struck me, I don't know if you found this, and and you watch a lot of TV, so you know how these things work. Did you feel like that air crash was very convenient for the purposes of pushing the plot forward?
Yeah, actually, saying that, because the episode, I feel, it's one of those things in the episode that, as I mentioned before, kind of introduces another character out of nowhere. I mean, I don't think you saw... I mean, I can't remember... I mean, the framing of it, again, is really weird, because that just seems like you got these 2 characters that you haven't seen before. I think, is it Larson?
Yeah, that's Dr. Larson, who's mentioned in Picket Fences, ultimately.
Who's carrying a bunch of money, and the pilot, and they just seem to crash for no reason at all. I still don't think I fully understand what caused the crash, if I'm honest.
I don't think anything did. I think it was just maybe like a bad weather, or something went wrong in the plane, which is really, I mean, in a way I'd buy it more if the crew cut man had turned up and blown the plane out the sky to try and kill them.
Like with the bazooka.
Yeah. Ridiculous as it would have been, it would have made more sense that he was trying to cover up these experiments, whereas Larson, just unlucky for him, lucky for Mulder and Scully, happens to crash right in the area that they're investigating as well, and they get the suit, they get his briefcase full of cash and all the it leads them to all the connectives about the kids and about how he's been monitoring the kids and how he basically was the guy who brought these kids into the world, and it's all a control group and everything. And you think to yourself, well, hang on a minute. Where if that plane hadn't have crashed, what would you have got? You'd have got an old man telling you that these guys are putting BST in the cattle, right? But what then? You haven't got any suspects for the kids. You've got some theories, but that's it. Where does your investigation go? And that's what frustrates me with this episode, because I think they, in a way, they wrote themselves into a corner, and Chris Carter suddenly went, "Oh, I need an incident. I need something to happen that will get me from A to B." And that, to me, that's not good writing, really. But yeah, at this point you've got, as I say, you've got the old man telling them, and you've seen that one of the BST guys is Gerd, played by. Well, actually, before I say that, the guy who played the old man, Robert Clothier, he reappears in season 3 in Piper Maru to actually be somebody else who gives Mulder, gives Scully in that case, some information again. It's funny. He plays two sort of similar roles in a way, which is quite interesting. Very different characters, but similar roles.
There's like an image or a scene I think we've jumped past. I was going to comment on. It's when I think Mulder and Scully are eating lobster.
Oh yeah, you've got a scene where they're dying, haven't you?
Yeah, there's it's oddly comical in terms of seeing basically I think Mulder licking his fingers, I think, and there's a bit where he kind of wipes something off Scully's mouth.
He does a little bit of a little, whether it's some barbecue or something like that. He just it's a little moment, isn't it?
The only reason I point that out is that I think at this stage of the series, I don't think there's anything romantic between them yet. Well, yet. I'm just wondering whether it's demonstrating if they're more comfortable with each other rather than it being a massive romantic thing. And I think at this point, because the whole Mulder Scully romance that will eventually happen, which spoilers.
What?
From what I've seen at this point and up to where I am at the moment, I'm not buying it as romantic yet. Or at least if there's anything romantic between them, I don't think it's happened yet. It definitely hasn't happened at this point, or those things haven't happened. I think it's very interesting, particularly with what's been happening at the start of season 2. I've noticed how quite comfortable they are now with each other. Yeah. Whereas perhaps if this was season 1, episode 10, then Scully might have just been, "What the hell are you doing? I can wipe my own mouth." Yeah.
You're right. It isn't romantic yet. No, there are there's always little hints, and I think it was as much David Duchovny as the script sometimes, just throwing little things in there, just little looks or little gestures that he'd do, or he'd sometimes stroke her arm, or just little things.
I think it quite ties into what I think's been a strength of season 2 actually, and I think it's probably wasn't deliberate because of pregnancy, but particularly season 2, I found there's a stronger sense of continuity, particularly in terms of character development. Once you've gotten past One Breath and you've had Firewalker in there, Firewalker in this one, it's not as pronounced in terms of continuity as much as this episode would like you to think it is. It's moments like that. I think it's nice to know that there's at least some kind of acknowledgement that there is serialization, that there is developments in terms of their relationship with each other, particularly after, I think, with what happens in One Breath, in that pretty much Mulder thought he was going to lose perhaps the only friend he's had.
Yeah,
but I quite like how different, how comfortable they are, and how it shows they have changed now rather than from when Mulder's pretty much convinced that he was there to spy on him.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely, and that's already there by this point. And like you said, the abduction has deepened that. So it's true. The other thing I missed earlier as well was a mention of Danny. Now I don't know if you are aware who Danny is. Danny's the guy they always call at various different points. You never see Danny. Sometimes you hear him on the phone, but you never see him. And he's just a guy at the FBI. And Mulder will often call him for things and offering tickets to the Knicks or something like the Yankees or whatever. A little Danny mention when Mulder calls him and gets some information. But yeah, the last time I remember him in it was the Erlenmeyer flash, funnily enough, and that's the last time we saw the crew cut man. So as I said earlier, this is a bit of not quite a sequel, but sort of a branch off from the Erlenmeyer flask, and it's interesting to see him come back actually, played by Lindsay Ginter. And, he doesn't have basically any dialogue. He just goes around cleaning everything up. You mentioned earlier that you didn't think he was well used.
Well, the thing is, though, I didn't actually recognise him at all. And I usually dislike when shows have to kind of spell it out and say, oh, it's the guy who killed Deep Throat, and then you suddenly see a flashback of him killing Deep Throat. I'm usually not a fan of that because I often think almost insults the audience intelligence. But then again, it was a different time back in like 1994. Audiences might not be trained to see that, but it's a character that's appeared on screen from what I remember, like a split second. And I can't remember who, didn't make it a point to remember who killed Deep Throat. It wasn't someone who I'd recognised before. It wasn't a face. If it was, well, at this point, the only person I think it would have made sense to have done it would have been the Cigarette Smoking Man, because he's probably the only real antagonist we've seen. So when the Crew Cut Man first appears, I didn't realise it was that guy. And so the impact of that was definitely lost.
Yeah.
And it was only really until Scully was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Scully was like, oh, yeah, it was that guy. But then I think by that point, it was that far in the episode that any dramatic impact it would have had eventually would be lost.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there's a crucial thing with this, where there's a line that Mulder says a bit later on when Scully finally twigs this and she realises that it's the Crew Cut Man, or they don't name him, call him that, but that's the name of him, and she remembers that it's the same guy who killed Deep Throat. Mulder says, I want this guy alive. There's a little moment where he's really pissed off at the thought this guy is out there and that he could get him, because he's still hurt from Deep Throat's death. He's very fond of Deep Throat. There was a connection between those two guys. He was pretty, cut up when he lost Deep Throat.
Well, I think it amplifies the start of the majority of Mulder's emotional development in most of the first quarter of season 2. Basically, it pretty much helps his trajectory for the 8-episode arc of when the X-Files is shut, and a lot of that is due to Deep Throat. So that bit is in there. That emotional connection is there. So when his Deep Throat's killer suddenly brought back in, it's like, oh, hang on, this might be a natural endpoint to cap off the first half of Mulder's development, or Mulder's character arc of season 2. And it gives him some kind of sense of closure, or at least a turning point in terms of that. But then I think what the show does is that they never made Deep Throat's killer much of a thing. So when he finally turns up, I'm like, I just thought it was a generic, because I think a generic government person just sent to clear things up, which is by this point is now an X-Files trope, which, well, not comical. The whole thing of like government conspiracy cover-ups is like the X-Files thing.
In a way, I kind of feel that I completely agree with you, and not enough is made of it. And Glenn Morgan said the same thing. He said, one of the producers, he said, my feeling is that to bring this guy back, his presence should have been better developed, and he's shot off screen. I thought, geez, this is the guy who killed Deep Throat, who the audience loved, and it's kind of tossed away. The episode just seems half of one thing for a while, then half of something else. I think there was a curious choice for Chris. He wanted to take a real left turn, but I'd rather have seen a whole episode about that guy showing up and Mulder getting back at him. Now, that's basically what we're getting at. There's a whole idea here that he's completely missed. Whether or not it's the fact that Chris Carter didn't think it was important, I suspect that's what it was. I think the point he was trying to make was that he didn't want this person to be of any importance to the big machine, because that, if anything, that shows how cold and merciless the machine is. If you don't send anyone of any real importance to kill Deep Throat, who is... And as you will see, and you've seen a little bit already because you've seen the Blessing Way trilogy, Deep Throat was one of those guys in that syndicate club. He was high up there. He was one of them, basically.
Oh, yes, definitely, yeah.
He was one of the master conspirators, and he ended up, as was Bill Mulder, and he ended up possibly when Bill Mulder was left, when he sort of broke away himself. I think there was an element of how Deep Throat finally decided that he would be the one to lead Mulder to the truth. And he then secretly started doing all that. So you don't get that confirmed 100% in the main canon, but it's suggested. But anyway, the idea is that Deep Throat was a big guy in this machine. So to have somebody no mark kill him is, if anything, more of an insult. And I think that's what Chris Carter was trying to do. The only problem with that is that you miss an entire emotional arc for Mulder. And that's what you don't get in this episode.
So you're saying that, I think it might have been, if the episode was kind of structured in a way that it was more about Mulder kind of getting some kind of closure. There could have been like an interesting twist in that Mulder gets some kind of closure, and the Crew Cut Man gets killed, but it's beyond Mulder's hands, which I think is the right way to do, because Mulder wants him alive. But I quite like the idea that, as you said, that he's like a hired gun. Perhaps, I don't know, that Mulder's probably got some kind of vision that this guy personally killed Deep Throat, and that was probably higher than he is. But then Mulder only pretty much at the end realises that he's pretty much just a lackey who had no emotional involvement in killing Deep Throat, which I think then kind of gives Mulder an extra oomph to find out who got this guy to kill, who told him to kill Deep Throat, but then at least give some semblance that the man who actually pulled the trigger is now kind of, well, effectively not paid for his crimes, but there is some kind of eye for an eye type thing. So, but then it gives the audience and Mulder some kind of like, okay, some mini closure, but then there's bossy, but then there's like a man behind the curtain or the man behind the crew cut man to chase after.
Yeah.
But the episode doesn't really delve into that.
I think it was a missed opportunity. I think you could have had more of an emotional resonance, but I think it kind of is part of the reason the X-Files is so well remembered, in that it kind of always choose to focus on other things. You know, Mulder was... Very rarely did Mulder... They did it a bit more as the show got more confident in itself, but at this point it wasn't... I don't think really felt like it was going to do many arcs in that sense and do many emotional sort of arcs in that way, and I don't think that was the approach that Chris Carter was taking to the Crew Cut Man or Deep Throat or any of it, really. I think he was looking at it from a very different perspective, and he was more interested in what ultimately Mulder finds out through the investigation here, which is the connection back to purity control, back to the alien DNA that Scully found in the Erlenmeyer flask. And I think that's what he was more... I think that's what he's more interested in. Because, yeah, like Morgan said, he's killed not off screen, but he's killed in a really throwaway way to complete the arc of somebody else, some guest character, the sheriff. It's his arc of revenge, basically, for his son in the end. And that's like, well, fine, but you've not just killed some random goon who's killed your son. You've killed the guy who killed Deep Throat.
Yeah, and it's, as well, it's perhaps the emotional crescendo of season one. I mean, I think pretty much most of season one is building up to that scene on the bridge. And as much as you can say that I think Chris Carter wasn't interested in that, he, I think, dropped the ball so much in that he probably never realised just how much potential there is of a follow-up for a moment which is probably one of the biggest things that happened in season one. And it's one of the big reasons I think I've given it a low rating in that. Whether it's my modern day taste of modern TV in terms of being used to much more subtle or complex character development, misjudging a show a few decades before that's probably part of my opinion at the moment. But I just think it's just a massive, I don't know, it's just a real letdown. No, I agree, and it's interesting what they, how they resolve that, really. But it is the back half of the episode. Glenn Morgan said about it, it felt like it was one episode of one thing and one episode of another. So by the time you're in this second half of the episode, you get the two strands now. You get the whole the reveal of the alien DNA being part of the bovine experiments on these kids, but you also then get the whole thing with Gerd and the reveal that Gerd has been, peepholing in Beth's house, in the house of presumably just this family, if not more. And then you get the revelation of him and who he is, and you get the scene where he's, interrogated once Mulder sees the shine of light through the wall. Although I've got to say, surely Beth would have noticed that hole in the wall. How do you get in?
How do you get into that cupboard?
Yeah, I mean, the only way I could have thought to get in would have been through the mirror.
Well, under the floor, because American houses, and you'll remember this when we went to America. They have the bottom. Sometimes there's no bottom, like in British houses that it's all cement. Sometimes American houses have underneath, so that you could crawl possibly underneath the house to get up there.
It just seems a lot of effort. It seems a lot of effort for perving.
Yeah, but if you're a committed, pervo paedophile, I'm sure you don't know anyone like that, hopefully, but it's that whole, like, if you were that person, you would surely, do that, wouldn't you?
If he's been going at kids, why was he staring at a woman in her mid to late 40s? I don't get it. Who was he recording?
Well, I think the idea with, and yeah, you're right, it's not very clear, but I think the idea with Gerd is that he was a troubled man who was recruited into helping these bovine experiments, but he basically went a bit. He's obviously mentally disturbed because he's spying on these, this entire family, not just the kids, but the mother as well, and he's recording tapes, and he says, I loved these kids. And then you find out he's the one who's been etching he is one, she is one on in order to make everyone aware that they're being experimented on. So I think he sees himself as like their guardian angel. So he's twisted in his head, and that's what I get from it. And Mulder describes him as a poor soul, which I thought was a bit questionable because, like, he's not like an innocent guy in this. He's been kidnapping children and videotaping children. He's not an innocent guy. But I think that, I don't know about you, that's what I got. I think he's sort of seen the dark experimentation on these kids and on this community and on this town, and he's trying to do something about it.
Well, I think pretty much the golden rule for any villain is that they should see themselves as the hero of their own story. What I can't fathom at the moment is, are the kids being experimented on as well with those shots? But wasn't the growth hormone that the kids being injected in, wasn't that being put in the meat that the town was eating? So would he be eating the meat that was tainted as well?
Yeah, because basically they were injecting the growth hormone into the cows, which I think is what Gerd was doing, because the old man says that the livestock was improving like its product. So they were doing that to get more beef and more everything like that. So that growth hormone, which may have some dodgy stuff in it, was being eaten by everybody in the town, which is why at the very end you see the restaurant that Mulder and Scully ate in being closed down because all the beef is tainted. She says it in a wrap-up, the beef is tainted. But I think what happened was that program was effectively controlled by the government control group, which Dr. Larson was involved in, to do those same kind of experiments on kids in that town. That's what I think the connective is. So it involved some of the people who were involved in the growth hormone. And the old man says it, doesn't he? He says, well, because Scully says, well, the FDA have said that this beef is safe, and the old man goes, what, the government have said that? Like, you can't trust them.
So I think my head's beginning to hurt now.
Exactly, because it doesn't all make sense, does it?
Hang on, I'm going to try and get my head around this now. Okay, so many moons ago, when these teenagers were much younger, they was being injected with this growth hormone. So Gary said he was what? Gary's dad wanted him to be a basketball player, so they sent him off to Dr. Larson to go and get these growth hormones. So
vitamins, or the mum said, and she also said though that Gary never got sick. And at the very end, one of Scully's thing is that she says all the kids who had these hormone injections have now got the flu. So it's this idea that now, once they stopped having that, they were susceptible to the flu, or they may have got illnesses and things like that, but otherwise they didn't get sick at all. So yeah, okay. So that's an important point. Carry on.
So they saw these improvements happening to the kids. So I thought, let's go and inject them into the food. So they inject them into the livestock, and that livestock's been tainted with this growth hormone that's been fed to pretty much the town of Delta Green. So they start to experience side effects. I'm guessing they're just having the mood swings rather than the genetic or physical changes that the kids have, because they're not having it injected directly into their bloodstream. They're just consuming tainted versions of it.
Yeah.
So,
which could account for the violence, the heightened violence in the town with the rapes, things like that.
So the rapes involved, I'm assuming they said it was done by teenage boys. So would that be a combination of both the injections from Dr. Larson and the tainted food as well? Could that be causing an adverse reaction to everything? It
could be, yeah. But you've also then got the alien DNA, the alien genome, because this is the other element of if you try and tie it into the mythology, there is a reason why they are testing alien DNA on humans, and you'll get to that as you go on. But there is a reason they do that. But this was before I think Chris Carter had figured out what that reason was. I think it was the whole idea that they were using an alien genome as part of this to try and test on kids. And that's what Deep Throat said in the Erlenmeyer Flask. It goes back to tests on children with alien DNA from the alien sample that Scully found in that episode. So that's the element that isn't very clear as to who's doing what, why, whether the idea is that Larson was monitoring these kids and everything like that. But yeah, the fact that you've had to sit here and try and piece this all together means that it's not clear.
Yeah, I think there's a difference, and there's a difference in terms of being confused deliberately that the show wants you to be like, oh, I wonder if so-and-so and where so-and-so is this and so-and-so is that, and where it encourages the viewer or the audience to question the open-endedness. And then there's the other flip side of that, where it's just so bloody confusing, where for something that should be relatively simple isn't. That's when you get the issue with. And sometimes I think the X-Files sometimes has this issue where it sometimes thinks it's more clever and more open-ended than it actually is, and it sometimes falls flat on its arse. So when it tries to play, and I think this is one of those episodes where it does fall on its arse, and instead of ending it on the usual, I wonder so and so, like where you can't be fully sure of what you've watched, and an episode that jumps into mind for that, the biggest thing for that I've seen in the series so far is it EBE, where it's pretty much Mulder speaks to Deep Throat and you can't be sure whether Deep Throat's telling him the truth. Is that EBE or
you could say that most of the times they were together, but EBE was the one at the end. He gets close to seeing the alien and Deep Throat in the base. Is that the one you think?
Yes, yeah. Where it kind of it's more mythology based in overall, but you end that episode and you're not sure whether did Deep Throat just save him from making a big mistake, or was he deliberately trying to save his own arse? It's that kind of questioning of what you've just seen. That's the good kind, which when the X-Files does it well, it does it really, really well. And then you get those weird people creating podcasts to discuss it for 20 years.
I know. Strange people. Yeah, this is it, and that's one of the things I think that it suffers from. Really, I think it's trying to be connective. And by the end, you've got to the point where the kids are being targeted by the crew cut man. They've been secured by the Red Museum, as we said before. Mulder's having his stalk moment around the beef plant, which takes us right back to the teaser, the very beginning of the teaser, where the crew cut man is up to no good, and then he just gets shot. And it's quite a flat ending to an episode that has really sort of gone round in a loop and gone round in itself to get to a very simple point, really. And it's. The thing is, what frustrates me about this one is that there's a lot of really, really interesting ideas in the script. There's a lot of, like, in terms of social commentary, in terms of how, the fracture of a community, new age cult groups, people who are psychologically disturbed in terms of, their mental health, visions, spirits, there's so much, actually. When you break it down, there are so many little constituent ideas that you could do so much more with. And that's not even putting into focus Mulder's potential emotional arc and the connections to the mythology and the aliens. And it feels like all that is for nothing in the end, doesn't it?
Question then being is that if this was a 2-part episode, do you think that it would have given more time to breathe? Given more time to actually give the story to breathe, to set up Odin as a proper red herring, as potential villains turning into an ally, to be able to have the crew cut man as an actual villain rather than just show up and do bugger all, and to do justice to follow on the Erlenmeyer flask. Do you think this would have worked better as a 2-part episode?
Yeah, I think there's an argument for that. Yeah, I really do. I think what you've described makes sense, and I think you could have expanded this out a little bit, picked certain things to focus on, or even taken some of the elements of this episode and done a different episode with them. You could have taken the walk-ins, you could have taken the Red Museum, you could have taken the idea of kids being abducted, and you could have done a completely different story. You could have cut the mythology stuff out of it. You could have done a separate episode about a town where kids are being injected by, freaky alien bovine DNA and are starting to be murderous or whatever. That could be a completely separate episode. You could have done 2 very different stories. And so it feels like either you do it as a 2-parter and expand it out, or take a lot of these ideas and do different things with them. As they stand in one episode, no, it doesn't work. And if anything, it's too much that ends up creating too little, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
The man who died in that plane crash was inoculating those kids with antibodies derived from what may have been an extraterrestrial source.
He's been injecting those kids with alien DNA.
No, Mulder, that was never proven conclusively.
But it's the same substance we found in the Erlenmeyer flask, isn't it? The same material my Deep Throat contact died for.
Yes.
Well, it all makes sense. The money in the briefcase. They've been conducting an experiment here. Somebody's been paying to have those kids injected with alien DNA to see how they'd react. It's been going on for years.
Okay, so we're going to skip the do you believe in section because there isn't a fat lot to believe in really in this one.
Well,
so we're gonna...
do you believe in crazy cults?
Do you believe in crazy cults? Yes.
Actually, I've got a note that I've got which I never actually pointed out. How do you set up a cult? How the hell do you get people to believe that you stand outside and hum at people? So there's that scene where he tries to speak to Odin when he speaks to Odin, turns around and suddenly there's a bunch of about 30 people just humming at him. I mean, how do you convince people to do that? I want to know. I want to start a cult.
I think you have to be a massive cult.
Yeah. I want to get people humming and standing on one leg, or like I don't know, humming the Macarena or something, and claim it's a religion.
Try it. Block Switch is weird enough as it is, so you never know. You might
join
have some...
Lathemism.
You might have some Lathemism. Yeah, Lathemism. I'd do it. I'd do it. I don't believe in anything else, so I might as well. So... Okay, so we'll talk more about Lathemism in another episode. We'll bring that back. But for now, Buttgrum. That can be the chant. Buttgrum.
Buttgrum.
Buttgrum. That's your cult name instead of Odin. You're Master Buttgrum.
That's the Buttgrum of Lathemism.
Enough of this tomfoolery. We're going to do the X quiz. 4 questions and a quote. I've changed it slightly. It used to be 5 questions and a quote, but then I thought, why are we doing 6 questions? That's just ridiculous. So we're doing 4 questions and a quote.
I'm not really fussed about getting these right, if I'm honest. I'm still reeling from my...
Getting space, getting 5 on space, getting full marks, which I frequently mention in the episode.
You do. You keep
in the episodes.
That. You keep referencing that, and I'm like...
No, I just think we need to remember, that you love space that much, that you remembered everything about it. Anyway, are you ready for 4 questions and a quote on Red Museum, Latham?
Maybe.
Okay, well, tough. You got to do it anyway. So here we go. Question 1: Mulder and Scully eat ribs, very nice looking ribs, actually, in a restaurant early on in the episode. What is the restaurant called?
Oh,
no, it's not that.
Ribs R Us.
Ribs R Us. No, sadly, it's Clay's Barbecue.
Okay, that's my second guess.
Okay, question 2. When the boys, Rick and his mate, are in the car listening to some hard rock music before Rick gets abducted and then killed, poor guy, they're listening to a band. Can you name the band that is on the radio?
Oh, Death Metal R Us.
He's going to R-Rust everything, are you? It's Corrosion of Conformity.
Oh, that was my second guess.
Not actually a bad band, actually. Yeah.
That was my second guess.
Okay. I think you might do the opposite here, apart from space. You might have got 4 marks on space. I think you're going to get none. That's my prediction here. Question 3. What is Richard Odin's original name that Scully mentions?
Dave R Us. Dave.
Dave Krychek.
Yeah, Dave Krychek.
Dave Krychek. No, it's Doug Herman. And let me guess, was that your second guess?
That's my 4th guess, actually.
Okay, question 4. When the old man is talking about his family and the farm and everything like that, and how he's had a lot of history with this farm, he mentions the year that his grandfather bought the farm. What year was that?
2012.
He didn't buy the farm in the future.
It's the X-Files, maybe he did. You've
answered a question I haven't asked, which is, what year was the Age of Aquarius going to end? You're brilliant. You're answering questions I haven't even asked. So, no, the answer is 1890.
Okay.
You clearly paid a lot of attention to this episode. Finally, the quote. Now, you might be able to claw some dignity back here, but we'll see. We'll see if you can guess who says the quote and in what scene. So here we go. For a holy man, you have a real habit of pissing people off.
Mulder to Odin.
When?
During the episode Red Museum.
All right, I'll give you that. Fair enough. It's a cheat. But yeah, when he's interrogating him and Odin's just like getting the sheriff all rolled up and the sheriff has to go. Yeah, okay. You've got a 1 out of 5 then. Piss poor, Latham. Piss poor shit. It's almost like you didn't like this episode. I genuinely think you like space more than this, don't you? I really do.
No, the thing is though, with space, I think what with this is that with space, I think you actually can find fun in pointing out just how bad it is, in that you actually are physically laughing at how bad space is. This, it didn't feel like fun to watch. So it's not. It doesn't feel like it's fun to try and break it apart or try and make light of it. Space, you can.
So what you're saying is you haven't had fun at all over the last hour and a half doing this podcast. I know what you're trying to say, Liam. You don't have to sugarcoat it.
Hey, I thought
right?
I thought I signed up to a completely different episode. So
it's true. Have we told that story?
No, we haven't actually. No.
You thought this was, what episode did you think you were signing on for?
Is it It's the one with the cult teachers and the crazy
Die Hand Divalets.
Yes,
yeah,
that one.
In a few episodes.
I thought I was going to talk about that one until I ended up watching this. So I thought, no, I really like I really like that one. That was like batshit crazy, but then I realised, oh crap, it's this one.
That's a great one. Yeah, we're looking forward to doing that. Yeah, so bad luck, Latham. You need to double check the episodes before you say yes to me. This is the lesson learned here. So okay, that's 1 out of 5. That's probably the worst. It is, as far as I know, the worst score on season 2 yet. So well done.
I was aiming for 0.
Right, so that's the end of the Xcast this week, all about Red Museum. It's always fun to have Latham on because we know each other too well, I think is a fair approximation. But it's always a good laugh to have you on, Latham. So
no, it's fine, thank you. I'm looking forward to misunderstanding an episode again.
Oh yeah. You when you come on for like Tesso dos Picos, thinking that you were doing Ose Chung. Yeah. We look forward to that day. So until you're back on, I think you're going to be back on in season 3 actually. So it's going to be a while until you're back on the show, unless things change. But until then, what are you up to and where can people find you?
I currently have a TV website that I routinely put up reviews of. It's called The Bottle Episode, that you can find on bottleepisode.co.uk. I'm also on Twitter under The Bottle Ep. And my personal Twitter account, which is Zandmatt, which is XANDMATT. It's private, but if you just follow me and you don't look strange, I'll allow you to follow me.
What's the criteria for not looking strange?
If your avatar's not the same as Tiny's, that's fine.
Considering my avatar is David Duchovny as Mulder doing Mr. Potato Head, I think that's fair enough, really. Well, do follow The Bottle Episode and Latham. The Bottle Episode's great. It's got some really good articles on there, so do keep an eye on that and keep following him for his X-Files trawl through, because he'll come back on the show and talk about that again, as I say. Until that point, you can find us at the X_cast on Twitter, as usual, and the Xcast podcast Facebook group. If you type in the Xcast podcast group, basically, on Facebook. And we've also got the page, the Xcast page, and we're on iTunes. If you just put the Xcast in, and if you could leave us a review and a rating, that'd be amazing, because then we can get better known, as I say all the time, and that will help us in a big way. We've also got the Xcast blog as well, which is routinely pumping out lots of great articles. So keep an eye on all those things for more X-Files stuff as we continue into 2017. So we'll be back for a new episode soon. It could be Goblins, possibly, with Sarah Blair. So we've had that recorded for ages, and I've just been waiting for the best time to drop it. So Goblins will be coming up soon, talking about the first X-Files time book.
Got some goblins talking about it. I love the English language at times. We've got Sarah Blair and some goblins coming on to talk about the X-Files. So, yeah, that'll be interesting. That'll be very interesting listening. But until that point, remember, trust no one. The Xcast is produced and presented by Tony Black, part of the Black Hole Media podcast network. Title music is courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.